Hi, this is Debbie, and today I have a tutorial over at Waffle Flower using the Cute Happy Day set featuring Big Bear and Bird that came out in the spring release, and I thought you would like to see it here too. Over recent times my go-to medium of choice has been watercolours, but just recently I pulled out my Copic markers and really enjoyed some simple colouring with them, and so I thought I'd use them again for today's card along with an ink blended background. The Happy Day stamp and die set was bound to be a winner for me with a cute big bear on a bike. I knew I wanted to create a spring-like scene with the images in the set, but wasn't totally sure which ones I wanted to use. So I added a piece of white card into the Mini Misty and arranged as many of the images as I could on the card. I then stamped them multiple times with Sam Says Stamp Intense Black ink to get a nice deep black impression. In fact, I ended up using all the images on the final card. Moving on to the Copic colouring, and I'm going to speed the video up. This allows me to leave as much of the colouring in the video as possible without the video becoming too long. I've taped the piece of card to my grid mat to try and prevent me moving the card around too much and hopefully prevent you from feeling any motion sickness when watching. When I remember to do so, I place the caps of the markers I used on the left. I tend to use 2 or 3 colours for any one area and build up the shadows on lighter areas. I generally use a simple no-fuss technique, starting with the lightest colour and laying down areas where I intend there to be more shadows. I then build up the depth of colour with the medium and then the dark shade before blending back down through the medium tone to the lightest one. Also, the detail lines on the bear made an easy guide as to where to add some shading around his ample tummy. I'm going to play some music while I finish the colouring and then I'll be back shortly. With the colouring now complete, I lined up the matching dies and kept them in place with washi before running them through my die cutting machine. I like the attention to detail in the dies, for example how they cut out the inside blank area, such as that between the bear and the bike, and also around some of the flowers in the planter. Having laid out all the images, I decided I wanted to make a card with a long landscape orientation rather than your typical A2 card. So when moving on to the background, I cut a long thin rectangle of white card to work on. I ended up cutting this piece of card down slightly at the end, but the overall dimensions remain the same. For the background, I wanted to create a softly ink blended piece with pastel tones which would accent and also ground the scene without overpowering and becoming too busy. I started by blending in Sam Says Stamp Rosy Cheeks ink across the middle of the card and keeping the blending light and airy. I then moved on to Melon ink and finally Lake Shores. I love the combination of these inks, and their pastel colours remind me of a morning sunrise rather than the deeper tones of sunset. To give some extra interest, I liberally splattered a solution of Perfect Pearls over the background and then when dry set about deciding where I wanted to place each item. Seeing as I'd about filled my background, I wanted a skinny sentiment to complete the card, and I found this congratulations one from the Popping In set, which was perfect. I lined up the sentiment on a strip of black card in the Mini Misty and then treated the card with EK Success powder, which, as I'm going to be heat embossing the sentiment, will help to prevent the embossing powder sticking where I don't want it to. I then stamped the sentiment in Sam Says Stamp clear embossing ink and sprinkled with white embossing powder, and then heat set it by melting the powder with my heat tool. I then trimmed the strip down and added it to my card. I thought it would work well in the bottom left corner to help ground the scene. I added foam adhesive to the back of everything and then started to adhere them to the background. I only lightly put them in place at first, which means if they needed moving slightly, I could lift them and easily reposition. I did find I needed to do this when I was trying to line up the planter with the bike and found the planter to be too high, so it didn't look like it was attaching to the bike properly, and without the bear's head going off the top of the card at any rate. Having repositioned the lower left corner, I then added the rest of the images. For the card base, I scored a top folding card from some Nina Solar White card. I checked the final dimension of the background panel, which was 3 1/4 inches tall, and so I scored the card at 3 3/4 inches. This will allow for a white border around the background on the finished card. I reinforced the fold with a bone folder and then added the background panel with more foam adhesive. With the card almost complete, I thought a few clear sequins would add a nice finishing touch, and I adhered these with Range Multimedium in matte. And that completes this cute card using simple Copic colouring and an ink blended background. I'll leave links in the YouTube description below to the products that I've used today, as well as a link to the coordinating blog post over at limedoodledesign.com. I want to thank you for joining me today, and if you've enjoyed this tutorial, I'd be delighted if you'd subscribe to this channel. Thanks, and I'll see you next time.